Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, gentlemen, for episode 8 of my DIY twin turbo build for the Nissan 370 GT and 370Z. In this episode, I'm about to start building some of the oil and water lines. I will be going over 3 different sorts of line construction. First, we've got Teflon lines. These are your stainless braid covered Teflon hoses. We've also got your 400 series push-on hoses. And last but not least, your standard braided line, which is a stainless braided rubber hose. In this build, I'll be using all 3 types of hoses here. Some of them are for the water, some of them for the oil line, some of them for turbo drainback lines, etc, etc. If you'd like to see the short version of this video, which is purely on making up the hoses, I'll leave a link in the top right hand corner. And I will go through the process of what lines I'm making up to go where, and also how to make those lines. So sit back, grab yourself a cold beer, and enjoy your time here in the Aussie Shed while I punch out a few AN hoses. Let's get into it! First line I'm going to do here, folks, is the water line, which goes from the heater hose fitting on this side of the motor down onto the driver's side turbo there. Now this fitting here, I spoke on this briefly in probably one of the first videos. It's just a fitting I got from Z1 and just modified it. I think it was a temperature sensor fitting and tapped it through. I think it's a quarter NPT. Take a -6 90-degree fitting here, which sneaks this line through back under here. This is the first line that we'll do here. As you can see, I've already got one end done here. This is a 45-degree fitting that goes on the turbo. 45 degree swings it back out slightly away from the turbo manifold there. I will be probably putting a full heat sleeve in this because it is in a position where it goes over the turbo. There will be a heat shield here, but it'll still be getting a lot of heat. And then the exhaust and the wastegates are going to be mounted in this area, so this line will be subject to quite a bit of heat, so it will have a full heat sleeve. I've marked the length of the hose just with a Sharpie in a position here. So we'll take it over to the bench and we'll get started on this guy. Okie doke, so first thing we need to do is cut our line off at the length that we've marked there. Now, cutting this stuff, I generally just use an angle grinder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to masking tape over the mark. All I have to do now is just cut in the center of the masking tape. And what this does, it stops any of the braid sort of furring out as you cut it with a grinder, holds it all in position, and it makes it a lot easier to get the fitting on because it can be a real pain in the bum. So I'll cut this. You probably think I'm a bit bodgy, but I'm going to actually hold it with my hand while I cut it. You can just put it in the vise and just kind of cut it off, but it's really not that hard to hold if you know what you're doing. I've been using tools like this my whole life, so I'm quite confident using handheld grinders and things. If you're not, I suggest you do not do this and hold stuff in a vise. Remember, do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, we'll cut this off. There you go, folks, nice and simple, bit of smoke from the rubber hose when it went through, but all in all, pretty good. So, what we have here is our fitting. These are quite simple to put together. The old-fashioned cutter style, which all the AN stainless braid used to be, significantly harder than these sort of modern style fittings to put together. They are very, very simple. So let's start on it, eh? I'll just drop the camera down there so you can see what I'm doing in the vise here. Okay, so what we've got to do is get this onto there. Before we do anything though, folks, we've got to fit some heat sleeve onto this hose. Got a bit of a roll here of some sleeving. And for this stuff I just generally cut it with a pair of side cutters. So I might even be able to slide that on afterwards. Yep. Never mind, folks. Never mind, it'll actually slide on over the 45-degree fitting. It's a little bit large, the hose, the sleeve that I'm using. It's not a tight fit on this hose, which is absolutely fine. It's just a bit easier without the sleeving on there to make up the hose, and a bit easier for you guys to see what's going on. So we'll leave that off. We can start moving on to actually putting the hose together. So what we've got to do now is just expose the end of the hose that we cut and have a bit of a look at it and see how it fared. If there are any dags poking out of it anywhere, I suggest you trim around it with your side cutters and just nip off any pieces that you think are going to be kind of problematic. This looks pretty good, so I'm just going to leave it. So what you have to do is you have to get this onto the end of the hose, and you have to push it through to where the thread starts on the inside. So I'll get that in, and then I will show you exactly what I mean by how far it has to be pushed through. Handy tool, little screwdriver, a little flat bladed screwdriver like this that you can use to poke any bits of braid in before you get in too far, because you don't want them folding back on themselves, because it'll start to unwind the braid. So I'll just sort of try to get this on, folks. Hopefully I'll stay in focus. I'll just throw my glasses on so I can see what the hell I'm doing, because these little pokey bits of wire can be a real pain in the bum, because they do just want to poke out everywhere. So this is the trickiest part of it, is getting the whole end in without having braid sort of poking out at you. And this is where the little screwdriver comes in really handy for getting all the braid in. This is why this cut has to be as neat as possible, just so you don't bugger this up. So it started, and we're sort of starting to go on. So I'll get another light so we can see down in there. Alrighty, so you can see, or sorry, you can't see the hose yet. You can just sort of see it at the bottom. The hose has got to be pushed up all the way to where the thread begins. So I will do that right now. It's just a matter of just sort of pushing and turning it, and you will know when you have it up all the way. And what I do, I've probably got a little bit of an advantage here, folks, is I use my my vise here to grip the braided hose. You can see I've got a few round holes that I've kind of drilled while the jaws were shut, so they're sort of round. They're good for gripping round things, which is the purpose of them being there. So I can do this up reasonably tight without deforming the hose, and then I can get a little bit of pressure on this and get that hose turned down in there, and even help it along with a little bit of a tap. I'll just put a spanner on this, so everything always moves a bit better with a little bit of a turn. I think I just about have that. Okay, so now you can see the hose is right there, right up against where the thread starts on the inside, and that is where you have to be. If you cannot see that butting up against the inside of the thread there, then it ain't in properly. Alright folks, so that's where you have to be. Now, next thing I always do, is I put a Sharpie mark around the bottom of the hose. Now the reason I do this is so I can check if the hose is backed out of the end of the locking fitting, because sometimes that can happen and you're left in a situation where you have a hose that's not properly seated. You've got the connection all put together and you don't even realise it. And then what can possibly happen is the fitting can come apart and you're just like, oh, why'd that happen? You know, it was assembled so well and everything. Reason is it backed out while you're putting it together. Bit of a Sharpie mark, it just gives you some sort of a reference point that you can use to define whether or not it has backed out. It usually doesn't. Everything usually goes pretty well. They don't usually back out on you, but they do sometimes. Always good to have some way of knowing it. Anyway, I'll load this back into the vise, but what I'll do, I'm clamping back down on the hose again. So I've got that held in there just because this once again helps me keep pressure in a downward position on this fitting while I'm assembling it. You can just use a normal vise for this. You can get some soft jaws. They don't have to be specific AN soft jaws or anything like that, just some aluminium soft jaws for your standard bench vise that you can put in there and use to grip onto things like this. So what we have to do now is we have to screw this guy just basically down in through the top. Now, you need plenty of lube, folks. I just have an oil can sitting here on the bench with some oil in it. No idea what sort of oil I've got in there, probably just something that was sitting around. It might be motor oil or gearbox oil, or I really have no idea. Just plenty of oil on the threads and on the barb end as well, just so that it's all really well lubricated, and even you can even squirt a little bit sort of down in the end there just to make sure she's all lubed up. Because, as you know, there's nothing worse than going in dry, is there, gentlemen? Should start pretty easy. The issue is you're straight away starting to engage into the end of the rubber tube. So you just have to be careful as you start it that you don't get one or two threads engaged and not engaged correctly, and then cross thread the very start of it because of the pressure that the rubber hose is doing, forcing the fitting up away. So you've just got to be really certain that you're starting in straight. That is the only real issue. There we go. You'll know when you get it in, mate. It goes in fairly easy. Like I thought, oh gee, this is feeling a bit tight. Maybe it's a little bit of a dodgy fitting. I was almost going to go for a spanner, but I thought, no, I'll persevere by hand, because you should be able to wind this in a fair way without too much drama. Okay, and grab yourself some spanners. All your AN fittings are imperial sizes, so you won't be able to use any of your metric stuff. I don't use you can buy actual proper AN spanners for putting this stuff together with, but they're frightfully expensive, and if you're not using them all the time, it's pretty hard to justify the cost. I just use normal spanners. They don't tend to mark the fittings up, and it all seems to sort of go quite well, really. And some of my spanners are quite old and daggy, but yet they still work. So yeah, so you need to obviously get a spanner on the bottom fitting and a spanner on the top, because you don't want this bottom fitting that's on the hose, you do not want that to turn. You want to be threading this one down into it, like so. Just checking to see if the hose is backed out at all. It doesn't appear to have at this point, so we will just continue to thread this in. It's starting to get quite tight. With the old cutter style AN fittings, you used to go down until there was a small gap between the fitting and the locking collar. and that was considered to be the correct position, and it was quite hard to actually get them to that point. These sort of newer style ones, you really just need to get these down snug, get them down as tight as you can and as snug as you can. They're basically more of a compression fitting than the old cutter styles were. So yeah, same hose and everything, but just a different style of fitting to use on the hose. The cutter fitting is probably the better fitting, if I had to say so, in all honesty, but they're certainly a lot harder to assemble, and a lot harder to get apart if you have to shorten a hose or change a hose or anything like that. They are a bugger of a thing. But these guys are very easy to replace the hose on and get apart and just get the hose off and everything. They're actually quite good for assembly and disassembly. So there we have it, folks. That's completely assembled there now. You can see the Sharpie mark around the bottom of the fitting there is still where it was, so the hose hasn't backed out at all. We know for a fact that the hose is fully up inside the fitting and it's locked down up as far as it can go. So that's that fitting done. We have a way, as I said, with a Sharpie mark to check whether or not it's been assembled correctly, and you know, it's been assembled to the best of our capacity at this stage. So that is a hose finish. It is that simple, folks. So that's your standard AN braided line fitting done. You don't need to pay people to make these up for you or order them in certain sizes, because it's always a pain in the ass. Often you have to adjust them and all that sort of thing, or you find that the angle that you've chosen for the end isn't quite right, and if they've been crimped, and you know, the crimp fittings are awesome and everything, but they're not reusable. These are all reusable. You can take them off things and put them onto other things and all that sort of stuff. So the only thing left to do with this now is to put a heat sleeve on it. So we will do that right now. So as I mentioned, this hose is right in the firing line of the turbo manifolds. So we will get as big a heat sleeve on this as we possibly can. We'll go full length of the thing and even have it slide down over the fitting slightly. I just cut these guys with side cutters. Seems to do the job. Fiberglass inside is always a little bit of a tricky thing, but it will be fine. Rightio. So there's our heat sleeve. I'll slide it on from this end that's got the shallower angle on the fitting. I'll just throw a bit of tape over it so we don't get fiberglass down inside the hose, and we'll just slip this guy on like so. Pull him off. And that is that, folks. That is a stainless steel braided line, fully heat sleeved, ready to go. The only thing I've got to do now is just blow through it with the air blower. I always like to blow everything out multiple times before putting them on things. This will be blown out now for this stage of the assembly. Once everything's progressed further with this build, once everything is pretty much completed, the whole thing will be torn back down. Everything will be clean, checked and double checked for the final assembly. So we'll blow this guy out now and then we'll go and throw it on the motor, eh? So that's him here, folks. On she goes. And as you can see, folks, she's definitely in the firing line of the heat, which is the reason why we have this sleeve on here. And then she goes back through here and up in under this guy here. And that is our first turbo water coolant line. Very nice indeed. So what I can do here too is actually just slip this right down over the fitting there now, and that just gives us a hell of a lot of protection from the heat, and that is job done. Now the fitting on the other side, which is directly opposite this, it has to go down under the motor and actually goes onto the other turbo on the other side. The water cooling lines for the turbos are run in series, so one turbo line feeds into the other turbo and then goes back out. It's the way that everyone does it on these engines with most twin turbo setups in general, and it really boils down to the small amount of water that we're talking and the high volume of flow that linking the two turbos together doesn't have much effect on the capacity of the coolant to cool the cores. You might think, oh, you're putting red hot water out of one turbo into the other turbo, it's not going to do anything, because of the volume of flow through the cores really doesn't make any difference. I've seen people to go to extremes to do each turbo individually into the cooling system, which is absolutely fine. There's no drama in doing that. You know, I can understand why people would want to do it that way, but believe me, doing it this way, there's absolutely no issues. I'm pretty sure the Fast Intentions kit does it this way. I'm sure AAM would do it this way. The old GTM kits used to do it this way. Oh no, sorry, AAM doesn't do it this way. They have sort of a big water manifold at the back of the engine, but basically it's sort of a complicated version of the same thing. But this is the way I'm doing it, and I don't have any problems with it at all. It's a proven method that just works. So anyway, on with that. Oh, and also the other benefit to it is because it's near impossible to get to the coolant fitting on the other side of the turbo, you can attach the coolant line fitting first before you mount the turbo, run the line through underneath, and then on the other side it attaches to the outside, and the inside line is attached to the output on the kind of opposite of this guy on the other side of the engine. So it also works really good for assembly and disassembly of the turbochargers, because you can, as I say, mount it already to this line, have the line coming through the other side, mount the turbo with the inside water hose just dangling, because it's the outside one that we're connecting to, mount the turbo, connect this up to the outside line, the inside line that's dangling on the other side, you then just connect up to this position here, and it works really well. You're not trying to reach in behind the turbo to connect or disconnect the inside waterline fitting, which, believe me folks, you would be absolutely have your work cut out for you if you were trying to do that with that in position. That being said, there is something slightly different about the right-hand drive all-wheel steer version of the 370 GT. There is what appears to be an electrical position sensor down here on the steering rack, which isn't there on the 370Zs, and also the two-wheel non-high-gas versions of this vehicle. That gets in the way of the inside waterline, so the inside waterline here has to have a 45-degree extension put on it to clear that, and I also have to slip some heat sleeving over that position sensor to protect it from the heat of the turbos, and it does create a little bit more of a tighter spot down there than as I say, 370Zs and two-wheel steer versions have. Just another thing to consider when you're doing this, there are additional complications on this vehicle. But if you're aware of it, you can make allowances, and it's just a matter of working out a solution, which I think I've done. So from here, I think the next line I will do is that very line that we've just been talking about, which is the bugger of a thing down in here. And to start that, I need to actually get this turbo off. So I'll remove all the piping that's hooked up to it, remove this, and I'll get that turbo off so we can sort the fitting out and get the hose on there and get a bit of an idea of the lengths and all that kind of a thing. So bear with me folks, I'm going to pull this turbo off. So you can see here folks, this is our driver's side turbo. That's how it was sitting on the engine there. That's the fitting that we just hooked that line that we made up into. So this is the back side over here, and this is the fitting that I've just put on there to get me away from that position sensor on the steering rack. So you can see with the turbo sitting there, it just shoots that connector off to the side instead of directly straight down, and I'll show you the steering position sensor. Now the turbo's off. So this is it here, folks. You can see it's, your turbo's here. It's right in the way of where that pipe's going to come out. And it's right also in the field of heat from the exhaust side of the turbo. So I will wrap that in some heat sleeve, probably a double layer. At this stage though, I will leave it just because it's one of the things I'll do last, just because if I do any cleaning and stuff down here, I just don't want to end up getting it all kind of screwed up. I've also replaced the fitting on the steering rack here with an AN fitting. This is the return line, so it's not a high pressure line. It goes from here to the cooler on the front. And there was just no way to fit it in the original configuration. The line that came off it was a straight line and it interfered with the turbocharger. So putting a 45 on it allows me to just shoot the line out of the way, and I just got to make up a new line. Like I say, it is a low pressure line. It's not the high pressure side. That's this guy here, this banjo that goes on the back and then comes out here to this line. So that's your pressure side, that's your return line side. And it's just basically probably going to end up shooting through here along beside the engine mount. So that's the guy there that's causing all the problems. So this is the solution. So this coolant line that runs off the backside of the turbo, it'll go straight under the motor in the same fashion that the automatic transmission lines do here. I'll probably actually run it through and clip it to those lines just to hold it nice and safe and secure. I'll also only run a small section of heat sleeve on it, probably about maybe 8 inches or so, just to get me covered in this area here. Once it sort of goes through under the motor, it should all be fine. Alright folks, same process with this hose as the other one. I actually just forgot to hit record on the camera while I did this guy. This was the piece that we unwrapped. It was the other half of our cut. Took it off, trimmed off a few dags with the cutters, pushed it on, put it in the vise, tapped it down while rotating it, and she's now good to go. The hose is right up against the thread, just like the other one was. I'll once again just throw a bit of a Sharpie mark on it, just to make sure we don't come adrift. During our assembly. So, put him down there. Always like to be down as low as you can be, folks, so you don't have a whole heap of hose sticking up in your way. Throw a bit of oil on your fitting, bit of whatever. Lovely. Bit in the thread there. To make it all nice. And now just try and start this guy. That started really well, that one, compared to the other guy. It didn't start real super good, but this went on very, very easily. I could actually have this just locked in the vise on the fitting, but if I do that, it doesn't let me keep track of the hose being snugged up. There's nothing wrong with doing that if you think you can do it and keep track of the hose at the same time. Bloody go for it. But for me, this is my preferred method. So I'll just get this snugged up, which is right there. Pull him out. Wipe over. Line's still there. We haven't slipped out at all. That's all good. And that is good to go. And as you can see, folks, there's no scratches on it from just using normal spanners. She's in perfectly fine condition. We haven't made a mess of it at all. I think this fitting may have even been a reused one. Not sure, because I do have a few reused fittings that I've used on different things, taken back off and, you know, you put something together, the angle's wrong, or you add something on later and that interferes with it, so you'll change it out for a 45 or whatever. So you do get a bit of that. Anyway, so this guy will then bolt in to our fitting on here, which is our little secret snazzy 45 to get us away from that bloody steering thing. Righto folks, the turbo's back on. Now this is the line that we just started, and as you can see, if we didn't have that 45 on there, it would have come straight down directly over the top of this position sensor on the steering rack. So just a simple solution to a simple problem. You can see that up there, and we go straight under the motor and run along with the automatic transmission cooler lines. So what I'll do, I'll just whip over the other side, hold the line where I want it, mark it on the other turbo, we'll undo it and pull it back through and put the other fitting on. So here we are around on the other side folks. This is that bit of hose just fed through there that we sent through from the other side. And what we'll do, this is our other fitting here, the outside one. We'll just hold him up in this position, get a length, mark it where it intersects with the fitting, pull it back out, cut it off, take this fitting off the turbo, put it on the hose, and that's another hose done. So let's get this out and get it back to the bench. And that's it folks, that's our cross-engine turbo waterline. We'll go and fit that on the motor, eh? There we go folks, that's our hose back in position with all the sleeving and everything in place, running through underneath, all nice and protected, no exposed abrasive braid anywhere. And this is our other side. As you can see here, it's almost impossible to get in here to tighten this up. A spanner doesn't even go close to fitting in there. So what you do, undo the banjo bolt, do the fitting up nice and tight, and then put the banjo bolt back in. The banjo bolt we can get to, we can just put a socket straight on that and do it up. That way this is done up first. This is why your banjo bolt has like a nut fitting on the bottom of it. Get these two really nice and tight, put the banjo bolt back in. Hence the reason why the assembly order of the hoses is so important on these waterline fittings, so that you are not in a position where you have to get to something like this that's on the other side of the turbo against the motor, which is just near impossible to do. So as I say, this next waterline fitting here on the back of the motor on this side is very, very hard to get to. It's sort of down in there, but we'll use the same sort of process. What I'll actually do on this one is I'll fit the waterline to the turbo, put the turbo back in position, bring it out, mark the length of it. It goes into one of our heater hoses up top. So this turbo goes back on with that inside hose already in position. Same on the other side. We can get to the other side because of the 45 extension that I've used. It does actually give me access to the retaining nut on the hose, but once again, it's probably easier for me to have that attached to the turbo when it goes on, and it's job done. I don't even have to worry about getting in there then. So yeah, that's the waterlines done. I'll just do this one off camera. It's a bit of a pain in the bum, but you get the idea. The next thing I think we'll move on to is braided Teflon line. All right, let's head back to the bench. Rightio folks, time for a bit of braided Teflon, or PTFE hose as it's called. You can see I've got some nice -3 stainless fittings here, some -3 braided Teflon line, some suitably sized heat sleeve, couple of spanners, side cutters, bit of a screwdriver for pushing back the braid with, and we are ready to go. Rightio, so you can see here, this has been taped up from where it was cut. Same process to cut it as all the other stuff, with a stainless braid on it. Teflon braided line, you can buy it with a sleeve, like an anti-abrasion sleeve on it, which is really good, or often what I've done before is put heat shrink on it to sort of help take the abrasiveness away from it. This is going to have a bit of heat sleeve on it anyway, so it's probably not going to be that big a deal. It's slightly different to do the stuff that's got the sleeving on it. You have to cut part of the sleeve back first, just so that's hidden underneath the fitting when you get it on, to expose the stainless braid, so you can tease it out to get the olive, which I'll show you in a moment, located on there. So it's always a good idea, as you've seen me do, to blow these things out once they've been cut off, just so you can get as much crap or anything out of there as possible. You've got to try and get these ends cut really square. If you cut them on an angle and they look like shit, just redo them, because you're really sort of putting yourself behind the 8-ball. So that's a pretty neat looking end there. We'll start with one of these stainless 90s first. I'm using stainless fittings just because this whole line running from the oil feed manifold back to the turbo is all stainless. So I might as well continue it on with this. The first thing you have to do with this stuff is you have to put your retainer on, slide it over the hose, because if you don't do that, you will be in trouble. Alrighty, okay, so that's on. That is what we want. So inside the fitting here, you can see we've got this brass ferrule. I'll show you how that goes on. And you've got the spigot or the barb here. God, my camera struggles to focus at this closeness. You've got the spigot there, the ferrule. We'll just show you what goes on. So what we have to do is tease the braid away from the Teflon. I just use a small screwdriver. You can actually buy a proper tool for doing this, but mate, I don't ever have any trouble just using a screwdriver. It's not a real issue. Always make sure your tube looks pretty good as well. If there's any dags in there, just try and get them off. So this is where the ferrule goes, and the ferrule has a ridge on it on the inside, as you can see there. So you have to slide on over your Teflon hose, and then you have to make sure that the hose butts up against the end of the ferrule to be in the proper location. Yeah, on there. Alright. Now, you have to make sure that the inner sleeve is right up against the end of that ferrule. So, however you do that is up to you, but it really just takes a little bit of a push. Probably can't see this because my camera doesn't like focusing down to that point. But the Teflon sleeve, or the PTFE sleeve, is now hard up against the end of the ferrule, which is where we want it. Once again, just like before, this guy goes in here. I'll just shove a little bit of lube on the threads just to stop the stainless galling up, which stainless has a bit of a habit of doing. And I will also put a little bit of lube on the back side of the braid there. Now, so there's a few different schools of thought on doing this, folks. Braided line is one of those things. Everyone's got their own techniques, everyone's method's the best, and everyone knows the right way to do it. And part of the reasoning for that is there are a lot of ways to do this that all work. Now, this is the way I was taught how to do it, particularly with Teflon line. It's the opposite to how you do your standard braided line. Whereas with your standard AN rubber braided stuff, you thread the fitting into the hose and the locking collar. Now with the Teflon, I was taught to do it the opposite way. You tighten up the retaining collar onto the fitting. So this is how we do this one. Lock the fitting in the vise, slide the guy over the top, make sure it goes down all the way, put your fitting down over the top, and away we go. So as you can see, folks, it's just a matter of clamping the two together. It's really just a compression fitting. So I'll drop this down lower and I'll clamp that lower fitting in there just to make it a little bit easier. That way I can use my other hand to spin the hose. Rightio. There we go. obviously a lot harder to mark up the stainless steel fittings. They're quite tough compared to the aluminium stuff. So you just do this up nice and tight, folks. Whatever you consider to be a nice, snug position, which is what that is. And that's it, folks. That is a done fitting. It is just that simple. So we'll sit this on the engine, we'll mark the length of it, and we'll bring it back for the next fitting. Rightio folks, I'll just bring the camera down here freehand. You can see this is a fitting that we've just done, hooked into our top oil line connection. I will put a rubber lined stainless P-clip in this position to keep the fitting held nicely onto the turbo there. It will also have heat sleeve that runs from the start of the fitting just to down under behind the turbo, and it will run through down between the alternator and into our oil feed manifold here, and that's the mark that I've put on him right there. This is our fitting. Always good to put your fittings on, folks, where they're going, just to give you a more accurate idea of your length. So that's the spot. We'll cut him off there, slide some heat sleeve on, and then put the fitting on. So I'll undo this and we'll take it back to the bench. So once again, folks, grab your masking tape. There's the mark there. Mask over the center of your mark, like so. Get it nice and tight, just to stop your braid fraying out. Throw a mark in the center and cut him off, just for the sake of it, folks. Even though, as you've seen, I generally do these freehand, I'll put this in the vise and I will just show you how to do it the safe way. Rightio, so she's sitting there in the vise. The big thing is you've got to keep it nice and straight so you get a nice even cut. Got my handy battery grinder here. I'll just pull back a bit so I've got a bit of room to work the grinder. But as I say, keep it nice and straight. Get your grinder on there and away you go. And it is that simple once again, folks. Okie doke, our hose is all cleaned out now. I'll just go and mark a length of heat sleeve on the motor. A little bit of tape over the end again, folks, just to stop crap getting in there. Throw our heat sleeve on. Slide him up to our old fitting. And that is bloody beautiful. So yes, as you would recall, that's the heat area of the turbocharger, all covered with sleeving, and this is our end that we're now working on. Get our fitting over, like so. Get the rest of this off. And now have a bit of a look at the end, because using the grinder will sort of melt a little bit of the Teflon, and it will tend to create a little bit of a burr in the Teflon there. Not hard to get off. That's it there, folks. Maybe you can even see that on the camera. But there is just a little bit of a burr there that I just got off with a Stanley knife, or with the blade there, just so she's all nice and clean on the inside, which it is now. So we'll just tease back the braid like we did on the last one. Nice and easy to do, folks. Nothing hard about any of this. As I said, there is a special sort of a little tool for doing this, but it's not that big a deal. I'm sure people are going to comment and tell me I should be using the little tool and that, and it's like, well, that's great, but I honestly don't care. Okay. Next goes our ferrule. Remember, it has a, it's closed off or semi-closed off on the end, and we have to push it on until the PTFE hose bottoms out in it. Okay, so that's started. I'll just see if I can zoom in down here while I push this on, so you can sort of see its seat. I'll just give it a push. And you saw it just slide down there then. Have a little bit of a visual check to make sure you can see that the sleeve is pushed up hard against the end of the ferrule. Give it another couple of good pushes for good measure, just to be 100% sure, which I am. That's bloody sweet, no issues there whatsoever. So again, throw a fitting into the vise. Bit of lube on the threads just to stop the stainless galling up. I could use some anti-seize paste on this, but honestly a bit of oil is all you need. Bit of oil on the back of the braided line here, just to give you a little bit of lubrication on the locking collar as it's spinning to pull it down. Always the go. So we shove him in. Baby, there you go. It will sort of do a bit of that. It'll sort of push really hard, and then which is the barbed end or the spigot end pushing through the beginning of the Teflon, and then once it gets in there, it'll go through pretty easy. Just push down on it all, make sure everything's snug down nice and hard. Bring your locking collar over, slide it back down over the braid, and away we go, folks. And she's now ready to nip up. Where are we here? I'll just stick that one down in there. Get a few turns on this guy until it starts to grip, and then I'll have to just use one hand to like I say, folks, a lot of people do this the other way. They do it the same as your normal braided line. They'll put this fitting in your vise and lock it in, and then screw that into it. I can't see that is actually a bit of a problem in any way, but this is just the way I was taught to do them. So this is what I do, and it does work fine. And that's not saying that doing it the other way doesn't work fine either. And that is another one done. And that line is complete now, so that's the oil feed for our driver's side turbo. I won't fit all of the P-clips to hold it exactly in position, just because, as I mentioned earlier, I've got to take all this stuff back off anyway for various reasons, and putting the P-clips in and supporting all the lines properly will be something I do very last, just so it's one less thing that I have to keep pulling apart. So I'll go and blow this out again, and then I'll just throw it on the motor in its spot, just so we can see what it looks like when it's all done. So bear with me, folks, I'll blow this out. You can see that's our line that we made up. Just sitting there with the sleeving on it. As I said, there'll be a P-clip holding it in position down in here. It wraps around the back, and then snakes under the motor, a couple more P-clips comes through under the alternator here, where once again it'll all be held together and goes into this position on the manifold here. You can see this is our other position for the other turbo, and this is our feed line. This is dash 4, so it's a dash 4 AN feed line from your original oil pressure sender position on the motor, going into two dash 3 AN feed lines for the turbos. You can see that's your original oil pressure sender on that end, and then I have an aftermarket oil pressure sender on that end. So that gives me all the ports and everything that I need all in the one place without a whole heap of congestion, and it all just sits nicely together. So for this side, just rinse and repeat, exactly the same as the previous line. I'll make this line up, put it in position, and just show you it mounted. There it is, happily sitting with the other line. So that's pretty much it for the PTE Teflon stainless braided line. I think now we should move on to some 400 series push lock hose and fittings, which is the oil drains for the turbos from the bottom of the turbo and back into the sump. I'll be using dash 8 AN push lock fittings and push lock hose. So let's get into those, eh? So this is the driver side oil drain there, with a bit of heat sleeve over it, and it's actually this blue tubing that runs under here, snakes down. It's only quite short, it's only probably about maybe 14 inches long, and finishes here in the side of the sump there. I'm just using dash 8 push lock fittings for this because there's no real pressure in it or anything. I'm just using some Gates 400 series hose, which is this stuff here, made in the good old USA. You can see I've already got a fitting on this end here, and I've got the length of the hose marked, which is just here. So I'm just going to cut that off. If you're interested in doing decent cuts on your hoses, hose cutter, bloody awesome tool. You can even cut plastic conduit with this, but it gives you a really nice neat cut. They're only a fairly cheap tool, and for cutting hoses, as you'll see here, we'll just line him up with a mark, cut him off. Beautiful, gives you a nice clean straight cut every time. Can't beat it, folks. You know, obviously you can hack through it with a Stanley knife or anything like that, but if you're serious about doing any sort of work on stuff, very good cheap tool to invest in. Anyhow, with these oil drain hoses, what I'm doing is I'm just putting a little bit of DEI, is it? Heat sleeve on them, just on the turbo end. So all I do just to stop because the fiberglass, you can sort of push the fiberglass out of the middle of them as you slide them on if they're a tight fit. It is a fairly tight fit on this hose. So all I do is just shove a bit of masking tape over the end of the hose there, just to stop the glass fibres going inside the hose, and sort of helps it slide through without catching on the edge. You can pick it up and just basically peel a whole heap of the fiberglass out of the middle. Hopefully I won't do it this time. No, that's pretty good. So yeah, then you just slide it up to where you've done your fitting, and you should be able to just slide it right up to the nut there like that. So that's where the turbo is. That's where there's only going to be any heat. All the rest of it down here, there's nothing. It's way away from the turbo then. So then we can just pop our tape off, and we're ready to go. And what I've also done here, it's something that you don't necessarily have to do, but while I had hold of it on the engine and was marking it, I generally mark the outside radius of the fitting, which is along here. I put a mark on the hose where that's going to be, so that when I assemble the hose, you can turn them around afterwards. I always just like to assemble the hose in their sort of fixed position, or so that they're very close, so you're not trying to turn the hose too much, because it will kind of cut into the hose a little bit on the inside. Not that it really does any damage or anything, but it's just one of those things, folks. It's just probably me being a bit anal about it, so that'll just go on like that. So how I assemble these, they can be a bit of a bugger if you don't go about it in the right way. I've seen people get them half on and have them stuck, and then they can't get them off and they can't push them on anymore, and they'll start using grease and stuff inside them and lubricate them to get them on. You don't need to do any of that, folks. All you need to do is just heat the end of it. I've got an old cheap heat gun sitting here on the bench, and that's all I do when I'm assembling this sort of stuff. I just put the fitting in the vise, so that this one's a little bit awkward because it's I don't know, 120 degrees or something. It's a little bit harder to get it sitting properly in the vise. Obviously my vise having aluminium jaws doesn't mark any of the AN fittings when I use it. It's very bloody handy. So all I do is just heat the end of the tube up for, you know, 30 seconds or a minute, which I'll do now. Just heat it on low, take your time, heat it gently, and you'll find it just goes on really nice and easy. It takes all the effort out of it. You won't do any damage to the tube or to the hose when you put it on, and it'll slide all the way down right up to the base of the fitting with absolutely no worries at all. You can feel it even though it's hot. The skin on my fingers is quite thick, so I can tend to kind of touch things that are quite hot, but you can feel when it starts to get soft just by squeezing it, and you kind of know that you're roughly at the right spot. Different hoses, different thicknesses take a different amount of time. There's no real rule of thumb. Just when it feels that it's soft enough that you're actually making a difference with the heat, because this hose is quite stiff. I think it's due to the sort of fire retardant cover that's on it, but it is quite a stiff hose. But anyway, I think that's enough heat. It did start to feel soft, and I'll just reposition the camera so you can see it slide on. Rightio, so that's the line there of where I've got my mark on. So I should be able to just start the hose and just push him straight on, like so, all the way in, one go. Absolutely beautiful. And that's all there is to it, folks. So that's it, folks. That's that hose complete, as you can see. So we've got our fitting on one end here. This is down on the sump, and then we've got our other fitting here on the turbo. And that's it. So this is the passenger side turbo oil drain. So we'll go and fit that on the engine and have a bit of a look at it. So as you can see, folks, this is the side where it all wraps around the turbo, and this is kind of where we're at here. Probably going to be easiest for me to just do the bottom first, being that the top's a straight fitting, even though they are a bit of a pain in the bum. Now on the sump here, I've just got a Z1 oil pan spacer, and I just drilled it and just welded an AN8 aluminium weld bung on either side of the sump. In all honesty, I probably would have gone for 10 AN, but there isn't enough room on the sump spacer for a 10 AN weld bung. I've used 8 AN before for turbo oil drains, and I've never had an issue with it. I know some people have all sorts of dramas with oil drains on turbos, and they go to massive lines and all this sort of stuff, but like I say, I've used AN8 before and it's never really been a problem. I don't think it's going to be a problem on this. However, if it is, it's something I can always look at in the future. Use a different oil pan spacer, do something, and then change them to AN10. There's not a lot of room either on the bottom of the turbo to put an AN10 fitting, but as I say, I'm pretty sure this is going to be okay, but if it's not, it's something I can always address in the future. So as you saw, this is the end where the heat sleeve is. The only heat in this area is from the exhaust housing on the turbo there. And once we move forward, that's kind of all gone. So this guy here will just mount up under there. It's a little bit awkward because I've got all these things in the way at the moment, which I really don't have. But you always push through and get stuff done. That's the main thing. All you can do is just persevere, folks. Do your best and persevere. You'll get there in the end. You'll probably get bloody frustrated and all that kind of crap, but So that's on there. Like I say, we're on there. I'll just drop the camera off and give you a bit of a better look. That's it there, the heat sleeving sneaking down over the starter motor solenoid there and running down under the engine. Runs around underneath that 90-degree bend on the compressor outlet there. It's pretty much sort of follows that around and then runs into the sump in that position there. You can see there's nothing hard about that, just a few simple things. Whenever you're doing any hose stuff, I always keep a heat gun there, heat the hose, put heat sleeve on absolutely everything as if you're near a heat source, which is going to happen with all the rest of this stuff. And that's job done, and we can move on to something else. And here are all our other lines. So this is our standard AN braided rubber hose that we did previously with a bit of heat sleeve on it. And this is our Teflon PTFE turbo oil supply hose, once again with a bit of heat sleeving on it. So there you go, folks. It just goes to show you don't need to pay someone to make your AN lines up for you. Buy the hose, buy the fittings, they're all reusable. Eventually you'll end up with a whole heap of spare fittings and spare hose and things like that, and before you know it, you'll be bloody half the hoses you'll make up won't cost you anything at all. Like I say, it's all reusable. The only thing that's not reusable is the ferrule on the PTFE hose fittings. As it clamps down, it compresses, so you can just buy packets of ferrules to go on your PTFE stuff if you have to reuse it. Other than that, it's completely reusable. So I hope you enjoyed that. As always, folks, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Always a pleasure to bloody well have yous here. Good to get a bit of company on these lonely nights out in the shed. And remember, guys, if you like my content, subscribe to my channel, like the video, give us a thumbs up, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.